everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our lesson on the Electoral College and democracy. I'm Ms. Green, and that's Ms. Howard. You heard from her in part 1 of this lesson about some of the history of the Electoral College and how it works. We are both Albert Hill history and social science teachers, so go Tigers, but also go RPS. We love all RPS students. So before we get into the meat of our lesson, let's check in together. Are you feeling okay? Do you need to drink some water or do you need to eat something before you're ready to start learning? How's your learning environment? Do you need to go somewhere quieter? Grab some headphones maybe? About your mental health. You doing okay? You mentally prepared to put your thinking cap on, or maybe tomorrow would be better? We'll still be here. Just remember that if you're having a tough time, remember that you are awesome and we love you. Let's take a deep breath together. So breathe in. Hold it, let it out. Okay, let's begin. So remember that our goal for this lesson is to describe the Electoral College and explain its role in our democratic republic. So we are really going to focus today on the second part of this goal. Ultimately, you are going to be deciding what you think the role of the Electoral College should be, given a list of pros and cons, and then explaining that opinion. So for this lesson, you're going to need something to write with, something to write on, and your brain power. Here's our agenda for today. So first, we're going to do a quick review of what you learned in part 1 with Ms. Howard about the Electoral College, just so that I know we are all on the same page and are ready to extend that learning beyond the basics. Then we're going to go through our guided practice in which we're going to thoroughly explore the political controversy surrounding the existence of the Electoral College and identify some advantages and some concerns. Then I will give you your mission, and lastly, we will close out for the day. Ready to get started? Okay, so let's start with our super quick recap of what we learned from Ms. Howard about the Electoral College. So I want you to describe the Electoral College given what you learned in part 1. So I want you to take 2 minutes and jot down everything you remember. If you're feeling lost, here are some helpful starting points. So the Electoral College is, it's composed of, it takes what number of electoral votes to, it was originally created to. So think about those sentence starters and then you finish them. Take 2 minutes to jot down your thoughts. Pause the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, you ready to review? All right, let's review the answers to those starter questions, or excuse me, the sentence starters. So check your answers as we go. If you feel like you need to pause the video at any point, if we're going too fast, you should feel free to do so. Okay. So the Electoral College is the process by which the president and vice president are elected. It's composed of 538 electors from each state based on the number of congressional representatives per state. So meaning the number of people from each state that are in the House of Representatives and the number of people from the Senate. It takes 270 electoral votes to win the general election. And it was originally created to put all states on more equal footing, regardless of their size, so that the people in larger, more populated states couldn't have an undue influence on the election over states that are smaller and have fewer people in them. It's also important to remember that the Electoral College has a winner-take-all system. So that means that whichever candidate wins the popular vote in a state or has the most votes from individual voters in a state, that candidate then gets all of the electoral votes from that state. The only exceptions to this are Maine and Nebraska, but every other state is winner-take-all. Okay, so now that we've reviewed a little bit, let's jump into our question for today. So we said that our main goal in this lesson is to explain what we think the role of the Electoral College should be in our democratic republic. This is a relevant question because we know that people disagree over it. It's actually a very hotly debated topic today, and people have very strong but different opinions about it. So to begin, we're first going to look at a real-life example of when the existence of the Electoral College can cause a controversy or a disagreement in our political system. So we're going to look at the 2016 presidential election. Do you remember what that was about? Right, so that was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. It was our most recent one. So I have here for you the electoral map of the end results of the election. It also has at the bottom of it how many electoral votes each candidate got, as well as how many votes from individual voters, or what share of the popular vote each candidate received. I first want you to take a look at it on your own. Then you're going to answer these questions. So number one, who won the popular vote in the 2016 presidential election and by how much? So you might need to do just a little bit of math, but it's okay to estimate. Then, who won the 2016 presidential election? So who was the overall winner? Why? So why were they the overall winner? Okay, so take a minute or two to look over the map and answer these questions. So pause the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's review. So who won the popular vote in the 2016 presidential election and by how much? Well, it looks like Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, 2.8 million about. Okay, so who won the presidential election? Who won overall and why? Okay, but Donald Trump won the election because he got 304 electoral votes. Hold up. Wait. I thought that whoever got the most votes wins the election. Wait, so you're telling me that that's not how it works? If you're feeling confused, you are not alone. There are a lot of people who question why we have an electoral college, knowing that this very situation can and has occurred multiple times in the past, not even just in 2016. So that brings us back to this question. What should be the role of the Electoral College? Should the Electoral College still exist? Why or why not? A lot of people have very strong feelings about this and the role that it should play in our democratic republic. Some people think it hurts democracy, like Donald Trump back in 2012, where he tweeted out, "The Electoral College is a disaster for democracy." But other people think it actually benefits the democratic republic, like President Trump in 2016 after he won the presidency, where he tweeted, "The Electoral College is actually genius in that it brings all states, including the smaller ones, into play. Campaigning is much different." This change of heart is a little convenient, don't you think? But regardless, let's look at both sides of the argument. We're first going to look at why people support the Electoral College by seeing how the country stands to benefit from its continued existence. And then we're going to get into why other people don't support it and think it should be abolished based on some of the problems it creates. For any of you guys who are watching and might be interested in learning more about this beyond what we're going to discuss in the video, or maybe for parents who are looking to engage their student on this topic, I'm using Larry Sabato's book, A More Perfect Constitution, as my source for this discussion. It has a lot of great conversations about how he believes our nation's political and governmental structures can be improved through constitutional reform, and the Electoral College is just one of those things. Okay, so you ready to jump in? So let's start with talking about why a lot of people do support the Electoral College. What are some of its advantages? Well, one reason is because it creates political stability. Having the Electoral College really lends itself to a two-party system because of our winner-take-all system and the number of electoral votes you have to win. So it would be nearly impossible for a third party, which is one of those smaller minor parties that tends to focus on just one or a few political issues, to get 270 electoral votes or even to win a popular vote in even one state. So because of that, we've had a really stable political system for over 200 years with our two main political parties, the Democratic and Republican Party, lasting for a really long time and enduring. So we don't have really wild swings in power and a fight between a lot of different parties. We just have those two. So our political system is really stable because of that. Another advantage of the Electoral College that people argue for is that it forces candidates to pay attention to less populated states. If there was no Electoral College, candidates would spend most of their time campaigning only in the most populated areas. They probably wouldn't waste their time going to small, less populated states. They would probably stick the vast majority of the time to large urban areas like big cities such as New York, LA, Boston, Chicago, Miami, etc. They probably wouldn't go out of their way to go campaign in more rural areas because they'd be inefficient. You might be thinking, well, that's okay because those big cities are where most of the people are, right? And that's true. But the needs of people in urban areas can be really, really different from the needs of people in rural areas. Geography has a big role in people's lives, and we want our presidential candidates to understand the needs of the American people all over the country, not just in big cities. All right, and then let's talk about one third advantage of the Electoral College, and that's that it supports federalism. It helps to uphold it. So remember that our government is a federalist system in which power is shared and divided between the federal, state, and local governments. And one of the powers that's reserved exclusively to states is the power to run and organize elections. If we think about each state's electors as representing the interests of their states collectively, then the Electoral College supports this reserved power by giving states a major say in who is elected president, rather than just giving all of that power to individuals. Theoretically, if the electors of a state really believed that one of the candidates was unfit to lead, they could act on behalf of the state to vote for the other candidate. So if you remember back to part 1 of this lesson with Ms. Howard, we can recall that the Founding Fathers were actually kind of hoping for this by establishing the Electoral College. Okay, so these are 3 great examples of some of the advantages of the Electoral College. If you have ideas about more, I'd love to hear from you. So don't forget that you can use social media for that. You can tweet at us, or you can just email me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's move on and talk about some of the concerns then. So what are some of those concerns that people have with the Electoral College? Well, one of them is that the person with the most votes might not win, right? It's exactly what happened in 2016. So even though Hillary Clinton won almost 3 million more individual votes than President Trump, she didn't win, and President Trump did. So is the will of the people really being represented here? Let's take a look at this graphic on the right. According to the graphic, we are the only nation with a republic that chooses our head of government this way. Remember that a republic is just another way of saying we have a representative democracy, meaning that we vote for people to represent us. So the vast majority of republics are directly elected, meaning that they're elected through a popular vote. So just the person with the most votes wins. So if most other republics in the world are functioning this way and they're successful, why aren't we doing the same thing? Why do we still have it that the person who doesn't win the most votes can still win? Okay, now let's talk about another concern of the Electoral College, and that's that individuals' votes are unequal. So under the Electoral College, people don't have equal say. Remember that we learned electors are allocated or given to states based on their congressional representation. So that means that every state has a number of electors that's equal to the number of representatives and the number of senators that each state has in Congress. So while the number of representatives each state has is based on its population, so more states with more people in it that live there have more representatives in Congress, the Senate doesn't work that way. So no matter how big a state is, it has 2 senators. So that means that people in smaller, less populated states, so places like Wyoming or Rhode Island, they actually have a vote that carries more weight than people in larger, more populated states like California and New York. So your vote literally matters less or more, just depending on where you live. Okay, and then a third concern is this idea of faithless electors. So electors don't actually have to vote for the candidate that their state elects. So despite having this winner-take-all system, there's no law that says that electors have to choose the candidate that won the popular vote in their state. So these would be known as faithless electors, people who vote incorrectly, right? So this is rare, but it does happen. And actually, President Trump would have had 306 electoral votes if not for 2 Texas electors who chose not to cast their votes because they didn't want to vote for him. So ultimately, that didn't matter for the outcome of this election. But in the case of a really close election, it could potentially either create a tie, which is decided in a really weird way, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, or it could even cause the other candidate to win. Also, a lot of people don't even know the name of their state's electors. So why are we putting our faith in people that we don't know to vote the way that they're supposed to when there's nothing to enforce it? I don't know. And then fourthly, the last concern that we're going to discuss is the possibility of a tie, which I said ends in a really weird way, right? So the Electoral College has an even number of people, so it is very possible that an election could one day end in a tie. If that happened, the vote would go to the House of Representatives, but in a really weird way. So all of the representatives from each state would get together and they would just cast one vote per state. But if any state's representatives can't agree on whom to cast their vote for, then that state doesn't get to cast a vote at all. So Larry Sabato, the person that I'm using his book for this discussion, he poses this scenario. What if for some reason the delegates in California, Florida, and Texas all couldn't agree? That would mean that more than 1/4 of the nation's population wouldn't have any type of say in how the election ends, in who gets elected. That's kind of crazy, right? That's really not democratic at all. Okay, so we just went through a long list of advantages and concerns. So let's just summarize really quickly the two sides of the issues and the arguments that we listed. So some advantages we said were stability. So we have these two enduring political parties that are vying for power, not a bunch of parties that are vying for power. So our system is really stable. It's endured since the Constitution, which was over 200 years ago. It also forces candidates to pay attention to less populated states. So that means the interests of people across the nation are being considered, not just people in dense urban areas. And it supports our federalist structure. So it keeps that power of elections with the states. But here are concerns that we said. First, the person with the most votes might not win. It makes individuals' votes unequal. So depending on where you live, your vote might weigh more or it might weigh less. There's also the possibility of faithless electors, people voting not how they should. And then there's also the possibility of a tie, which could end really undemocratically, with some voters in states being totally left out of the outcome. So where do you fall on this issue? That's our next steps, is to figure out, what do you believe? Do you feel that the Electoral College benefits our democratic republic, or do you think it harms it? What should be the role of the Electoral College and why? So before we get into your mission, I just want to give you one more thing to think about, and that's your political ideology or your beliefs on how democracy should work. So in part 1 of this lesson, you discussed with Ms. Howard some of the differences between a direct democracy and a representative democracy or a republic. So in a direct democracy, the people vote directly on the laws and rules of government. In a representative democracy or a republic, the people elect representatives to vote on those for us. So we have in our democratic republic with a combination of those two things. We have both elements. But what element do you believe is more important? Is it more important for each individual to be equal, or is it more important for everyone's interests to be equally represented? To make this a little bit more concrete, let's think about this example. So what scenario seems less fair to you? That with the Electoral College, people in California have a vote that matters less than people in Rhode Island, or that with an Electoral College, the interests of rural Americans would matter, without the Electoral College, the interests of rural Americans would matter less than the interests of urban Americans. I want you to consider these two scenarios and see how they make you feel. If you're watching with a parent or with someone else, discuss it with them. So go ahead and pause the video, decide which one seems worse in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so what's your opinion? If you said that A seems less fair, you're probably against the Electoral College. But if you said that B seems less fair, then you're probably in favor of it. So how does this apply to us? Well, we know that people disagree about what the role of the Electoral College should be in our democratic republic. If it should continue as it is, if it should continue but with some changes, or if we should just totally get rid of it, if we should abolish it outright. It may just seem like another political controversy to you, but I think it's become really clear over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic just how important presidential leadership is for the health and safety of our nation and for our economy. And with that in mind, I hope you agree that it's in our best interest to have a fair system to put that person in their position of power. So now I know you might be thinking, the Electoral College, I learned from Ms. Howard that it's written in the Constitution, so it doesn't really matter what I think because it can't be changed. But that's actually not true. So it is difficult to change the Constitution, but it's not impossible. So either way you lean on this issue, it's important to know how you feel about it should the American public, along with their elected representatives, decide to take action on this issue. So let's talk about your mission with all of that in mind. Your mission is, given the arguments for both for and against the Electoral College, what do you think should be the role of the Electoral College in our democratic republic? Should we continue to use it to elect the president and vice president, or should it be abolished in favor of the popular vote? Explain your answer in one paragraph by stating your position and then providing at least 3 supporting details. Okay, so if you're feeling overwhelmed, just take a deep breath. It's okay. If you're thinking, I'm never going to remember all this, don't worry. We've included a recap of both sides of the issue in your mission for you to reference as you write your paragraph. Last thing before we close out, don't forget that Ms. Howard and I, we would love to hear from you and read your mission. So stay in touch with us. And you can do that by following us on Twitter or sending us an email with your responses. And if you do, we're going to give you a shout out in our upcoming videos. So this week, I want to give a shout out to Jamera Y for her extremely thoughtful email to her school board representative from last week's mission. So you can follow us on Twitter at RPS Civics at Home, or you can email us at cgreen8@rbaschools.net. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So thanks for sticking with us. I know we covered a lot of information this week, but I hope that you'll find it useful and interesting and that you're going to continue to stick with us. All right, I hope you enjoy this meme. All right, I'm signing off. Bye.